Hello everyone, my name is Jesse Pence. Welcome to my article on client-side routing. I won't waste too much of your time here. I just wanted to do a quick video summary discussion thing because the article ended up obscenely long. Let me just get a few things out of the way. First off, I'm not an expert. I am not some 20-year JavaScript guru. I literally learned JavaScript in March. This whole thing is me learning and trying to know more and grow as a developer. And so I really apologize if I get anything wrong. This whole thing has been done in earnest. I'm not doing this for school. I'm not doing this for work or anything. This is literally just, I tried to do a tutorial and I just wanted to do a little intro to let people know what client-side routing was. But as I researched and I learned about it, I really learned that the story of client-side routing is the story of the single-page application, and it's a lot of ways the story of the internet for the last 30 years. And so, I tried so hard to fit everything in and weave an interesting tale, and be conversational and educational at the same time. And I ended up having to leave a lot of stuff out. I phrased things in ways I didn't love, just for the sake of brevity. And so, if I got anything wrong, I apologize. Please let me know in the comments, because the whole reason for this is for me to learn. And I really just hope that somebody else can learn from this too. And that's the whole reason I'm doing it. It's part of the tutorial thing. And so let's get right into it. I'm sorry for wasting your time there. I just wanted to get that out of the way. Like I said, if anything is wrong here, let's educate each other and let's learn from each other. Please let me know down in the comments. And if you want to know how I really feel about it, if you think I phrased something wrong, go down and read the article. I'll link it at the bottom of the YouTube if you're here from YouTube. Just read it. That's how I really feel about things. And if I'm wrong, I'm sorry. Okay. Alright guys, so like I said, this is just going to be a lot more informal. I'm just going to try to weave together the tale of the last 30 years, kind of. It's not going to be as academic as the article. I just want this to be a little bit shorter than reading the article would be, but still kind of get the information across. I apologize once again if I get anything wrong. Please let me know. So this is Tim Berners-Lee. He kind of invented the World Wide Web as we know it, and he had this really prescient article in 1998 about how important good URLs are, about how cool URLs are important. And I thought it was really prescient and interesting because, as you'll see as we go along, client-side routing kind of broke URLs for a little bit. URLs, same thing basically. So I just thought that was really interesting because it was just a couple years beforehand. And so let's talk about what makes client-side routing different than anything else, because before that you just had routing. You had to do it from the server. And so let's talk about what that is. Like you got to go into your browser and you got to, let's get me out of here. Sorry guys. Right. So you go and you make a request on the internet, and you click on something in your browser, put something in the address bar, make a request, go to the server, get some data from a data center, go back over the internet. That's so simple though. You got to think about the extra step there. You got to get the host name figured out so you can know which IP to actually go and get the actual data from. But wait, there's a few more steps in there. Actually, you got to go through the router, through your modem, through your ISP, find out the DNS server, through the modem, through the router, through the switch, go into the server, figure out what you need from the database, go back to the switch, come into the router, go to the modem, back through the internet, back for your modem, back for your router, back for your... Every single request needs to go through this entire request response HTTP cycle. And so I hope that you can see how this could quickly become expensive, both in terms of time and money. Because, and so as long as the internet's existed, pretty much people have been trying to minimize this and have been trying to look for ways to keep you on one single page, because otherwise, you had to go through this whole process and it's expensive on the server. And that's what they're paying for. They don't care what you pay for. And that's why they really wanted to move it all towards the client. And so how do you do that? You got to use some sort of scripting language to tell what to do, because once you make one request, it's a stateless architecture where the same request gets the same response every time. So you can't expect that response to do anything different for you. So you have to do more things with the response. And so how do you do that? You do it with a scripting language. And so Netscape hired Brendan Eich, and this was Netscape. So Microsoft hired somebody, I don't know, to do JavaScript, and they were competing for a while, and there was just this whole weird time in the late 90s where, just Microsoft's fault, basically, where, and so I thought that this was a cool little statement that he had about JavaScript does not need to become Java or C# or any other language. And, it's kind of become a whole different thing on its own, and with TypeScript, we'll see where we get to, but I'm not trying to say it's a bad thing. Honestly, I think it's a good thing. I wonder how he feels about it today, So moving on, so they had all these competing structures, and you had to find a way to get it all to everybody to agree. And so this wasn't just about JavaScript, this was also about Java, and you just had to have a reliable way to manipulate the DOM, the document object model. And so what this is just basically an easy way of, you can still see, of making it so that everything in an HTML document becomes an object that you can manipulate, has reliable methods that you can use, and with that you can do some pretty interesting things. I think my next slide is actually about the browser object model. No. So this is VDOM, and it's about how simple that other slide is, how easy that looks. But then compared to this, it's like this is only 2 divs. It was a couple P's, the UL. It's not that much, but whenever you add all these DOMs in, it starts to become a lot, and you can kind of see why people started looking for things like libraries and frameworks before too long. We're not there yet, though. I just wanted to kind of help you visualize how the document object model gives you this structure that you can use to help manipulate the web page as you're on it, so you don't have to request another one. And so the DOM got standardized, but then there was this other thing called the BOM. I think that's kind of a name that we gave it after the fact when we had the DOM. But basically what it is just, you have that document, but how are you reading the document? You have to have something that you're actually using to see it. And what that is the browser, obviously, for most of us. So with that comes all of these objects. And like I said, these were not standardized until HTML5 in 2008, but this gave a little bit more structure for the things like, the URL. Where does that sit? That sits in the location object. And what are the websites that you were at previously? Those sit in the history object. What type of browser are you using? That's in the navigator object. How big is the screen, And from that, you had more things that you could manipulate. And that was going to be the secret to being able to do client-side routing, because what is, going from one page to another, but manipulating the URL and the pages that you've been to in your history. And so as we'll go along, we'll see how people were able to do that. But first, let's just talk let's talk about how you would do that. So the way this works is that, so the document object model, you have the document object, that's usually a parent object of all of your IDs or anything that you have in there. So if you have a p tag, all you do is you put an ID in there, or, even just the p tags, but it's a lot easier if you have something that, like an ID that you can call. And, if you say, let's put some HTML in there, you can put some HTML in there. And, that's changing a web page. It's changing the user's experience. And that was just one of many ways that we were given reliable methods to work with the internet. And then we also have the window object, like I said, not standardized for a long time, still barely standardized. But I'm looking at you, Mozilla and Safari. I mean, Chrome's got it going on with the leadership. I hate to say it. But anyways, the window.location is something like that. You can get the URL that sits in the bar. And like I said, between that and the history object, those are your keys to unlocking client-side routing. And so then next I wanted to talk about the world before AJAX. And so what that means, we'll see what AJAX means in a second. But what that meant was that at the time, if you wanted to do anything, it was really, really unreliable. Like this Apple developer blog that I saw, you can find it in the article. You had to install an ActiveX control, or get them to make sure they had the right version of Java on the computer, or what most people did was Macromedia Flash. And yeah, you went and played on some Newgrounds games at some point in your time, if you were old enough. But what I really want to show as well is this Gabo Corp website. This is really cool. So yeah, I found the website, and it's got this hilarious trailer. It's just ridiculous. But to be fair, it's 1997. This is kind of insane. And the bad part about it is, similar to JavaScript programs as we went along, is that you would have to wait for it to download before that people could do it. But people would wait because this was so cool at the time. I mean, just look at this. I mean, honestly, this kind of looks like some websites now, so it's a little bit better than I can do. Honestly, look at that animation. I mean, it's pretty impressive. And so at the time, this was enough to blow people's minds. And so you can see why people would reach for technologies like Flash. The problem was it was a huge security risk, and that's why luckily we were able to move past it with HTML5 eventually, but these websites lived on for a long time. And so this was all people had for the longest time until around 2004. The thing was, Microsoft had already done something with what we're about to talk about. They had already released Outlook, Web Access, and a couple other things, but nobody really talked about it. What they talked about was in 2004-ish, 2005, Google Maps came out with their beta, and it blew everybody's minds. This got really even cooler over the next years. You got better able to scroll around this map, but even just being able to press these buttons, this is the most high-def picture I could find where it could show links to this page. This is important. We'll talk about this in a second. But as you can see, the URL, you just had maps.google.com the whole time. So we'll talk about that. But the way it worked, AJAX, asynchronous JavaScript and XML. Catchy name, right? The whole idea is that you send the JavaScript to the page, and from there, using this XML HTTP request, it could then wait until you got to a certain part of the website, and from there dynamically load things in. And so as you clicked on these little buttons and you would press around, you would trigger these XML HTTP requests, and it would gather more JavaScript for you. The JavaScript would trigger and then gather more things for the DOM. And so this was really cool, blew people's mind. And I'm sure you're wondering, why did they call it AJAX? Basically, this guy decided. Jesse James Garrett is his name. Let me get out of his face. So he even knew at this time that this could lead to some issues. And this quote, basically it's the whole "with great power comes great responsibility" thing from Spider-Man. It's a classic trope because it's true. Like, people had this cool new power and they didn't know how to control themselves with it. They just went wild. And like I mentioned, with the Google Maps page, it kind of broke the internet for a little bit. That's not my words, it's other people's words. It's like I saw several of these links, and you can see he had a chat with several of his friends about it. Like, everybody loved it, but they were all annoyed by it, and they're like, why have they broken such a basic function of the web? I use bookmarks a lot and the extra effort bothered me. This was very common at the time, and they had a solution. And what was the solution, you ask? Well, hash routing. So the way this originated was that you would have this ID and it could just direct you around the page. They agreed that the way browsers would work is it would only request new pages until it hit this hash fragment. And the hash fragment would be used to be, tied to IDs generally, where it would show you where to go on a page. I can give you an example here in a moment. Okay, sorry for the jump cut, but I forgot to show an example. As you can see, container 2 in the address bar, you refresh the page, it brings you down to container 2 on the page. So if you go down and press this button that puts container 1 into the address bar, it'll bring you back up to container 1 on the page. Ignore the bright colors, back to the presentation. But the way it ended up working is people realized that, well, you're requesting a different part of an ID, a different part of the page. That could be anything. We could change the whole page. But once again, this was an issue with the JavaScript loading all the details, because the HTML, that's what the web crawlers from search engines would be looking for. And so I think, search engines are kind of a big deal for websites. You kind of want people to be able to find your website. And so this was a big issue for people. And so they got together with Google, and they had this great idea of just, well, you throw one character, let's do an exclamation mark after the hash, and then you can do whatever you want. And so that's what people were doing. And we got this monstrosity, the HashBang, from it. And I don't know. I'm hating on it, but it was cool people could use it. But I'm not the only one who thought it was dumb. I mean, listen to this guy. There's no piece of dynamic AJAX-y magic that requires beating the web to a bloody pulp with a sharp-edged HashBang. Please stop doing it. Tim Bray, Broken Links, 2011. And so it ruined everybody's SEO, ruined people's experience. So like what people would do for the SEO, for the crawlers, is that they would have a whole set of routes that just mirrored their cool JavaScript app. And I'm not sure what they're talking about with pretty and ugly. I think this is kind of dumb. But the idea was you send the HTML snapshot to the crawler. That's the important part. And you sent the JavaScript app to the browser, and that's what they would actually experience. But you know, like the problem was, like, this was just such an ugly fix, and people hated it, as I showed you. And so eventually, thankfully, people got together and did HTML5, and that was 2008. I can't think of who it was. I believe it was W3C. I'm probably gonna get that wrong, but got together and decided on this web standard. And the idea was to standardize parts of that browser object model we talked about earlier, so that that location and history object would be the same for every website, for every browser, excuse me. And so the way that that ended up working was that we got this history API that people could rely on using. And we'll talk about that a little bit. Todd Klutz from Twitter was really happy. Despite the usual browser inconsistencies and other gotchas, we're pretty happy with the HTML5 API. And that's the thing. We still rely on it today. We're getting some cool new APIs around the corner. I'll talk about them at the end, but they're not here yet. And so let's just talk a little bit about JavaScript history. I'm not going to go too deep into it because, oh my god, I can't. I did in the article and it's too much. But just generally at the time, like this guy says, like people generally just threw together jQuery. jQuery is still all over the internet. It's still widely used. It's just really reliable way of getting around the DOM, because like I showed you earlier, the DOM can be a little bit annoying to get around. But people, I mean, these were some of the first frameworks. You had people like Alex Russell with Dojo, and like I said, jQuery was huge. Mootool had Smooshgate. You can read about that in the article if you want to know what Smooshgate was. But we'll just keep moving on here. And so eventually, people's apps were a mess. They couldn't structure these JavaScript apps, and their traditional models didn't work for using doing it on the web with these live. They were used to that, you know, MVC. There's a lot of different MVCs. There's 3 different MVCs. I'm not even going to get into the MVCs and all that. You can read the article for me to maybe get it right. We'll see. But basically, the idea is that you have this separation of concerns, where you have a controller in the middle as a separation between your view and your model. And so the idea is that you have this central controller that just keeps everything true, keeps everything right. But the problem is that when it's in a server far away and you're relying, you know, you're waiting for each request, it's not a problem because it's going to go in between on the server anyways. But when everything's on the client, you want to update these things on the client and on your database far away. And so you're sending these requests to the server, but it can't always be synchronous. This didn't always line up. And so what ended up happening was we ended up trying to adopt different forms of these old models. And so the first person to really first group of people to really try to do this to a client-side model was Knockout. And they did the model view model, which a lot of people adopted and try to do different versions of it. But you can even see on their website, I mean, the website still looks like this. It's I'm not sure if it's always looked like this, but this is the only images I could find. But even then, you can see them talking about these declarative bindings. The idea of these two-way bindings was really, really important, keeping the view and the model in sync. Even like GitHub is a classic example that people use of like the view and the model getting out of sync from the old server model. But with this, you would have the automatic UI refresh, which keeps your data model state changes, your UI updates automatically. So the whole idea was with these templating systems that was all based around keeping these two things in sync. You could have, like, you could keep everything together and everything would work well on the client side, and you would have a system to structure your app. And that's really what people were looking for. They just wanted a good system because this was all new. Nobody really knew how to make this work because they realized that it was kind of broken. Everybody knew it was broken, but this is 5 years after Google Maps. It took time for people to work through these problems, and it's still taking us time to work through these problems. We're still trying to figure this stuff out, and I don't think that's anybody's fault. I think it's just new technology, and it takes time for people to figure it out. But I digress. Let's keep moving on. After Knockout, they didn't have a routing solution, however, but Backbone.js, just a few months later, like 3 months later, came out, and they included a routing solution out of the box. And so, as you can see, like, it's kind of familiar with what we know today. Not really, but they're starting to get this idea of having a central structure. I mean, it comes out of the server side. Everybody's trying to adopt the server side stuff. And they had their own little idea of a hash map URL, and it worked for people for a long time. Don't get me wrong, there was nothing wrong with this, but people were still figuring it out. And then soon, AngularJS came out and offered this full-featured SPA framework. It was just a couple weeks afterwards, 1 week afterwards. And so you had Mishko, I hope I'm saying that right, Hevery, and Adam Aborns, who came out with AngularJS. And you can see Igor Minar is one of the team, said, model, view, whatever. They were just like, we don't even care. We're not we know we're all just trying to figure it out, but we're just going to give you these opinions, this structure to work with. And people were happy to have that structure. AngularJS took off, and Google adopted it, so that really helped people allay their concerns, because they finally had the structure to build with, that a corporation that they respected and who was at the forefront of all of this innovation adopted. So how could they go wrong? And so a lot of people were using AngularJS for a long time, and there's nothing wrong with Angular, don't get me wrong. So what was the problem again? Remember, we were talking about hash routing earlier and about how it had screwed up SEO. Everybody was looking for a solution. We found the history API that catches us up with that part. And so the problem is that people would have this doubling of their routes for the browser and the crawler, and they would also have a doubling of routes for sometimes mobile sites. Like you had Facebook Lite, which was all HTML still, and I think it still exists. I'm pretty sure Facebook Lite still exists. And so even now people are accepting the idea of, let's just server render a whole thing and throw it over. I'm not sure what Facebook's doing now, actually. I'm very curious. But there had to be a better way, right? And the idea was, wouldn't it be nice if we could, on the server side over here where we're sending this HTML, and the JavaScript side, what if this HTTP server, what if this was all just JavaScript? What if you just wrote some JavaScript and you could run it everywhere, and that would be how everything worked? You got isomorphic JavaScript. And oh man, that's a silly term, but people still use it to this day. The whole idea is it's just code that works in Node that also works in the browser. That's the whole idea. It's isomorphic, one shape, you write the same code. Whole idea. And so but this helped with the server code, and you can see even Ryan Dahl. I have another quote in the article, but I think this one might be better. And there's a lot of people who are very familiar with JavaScript, and giving them these tools to be able to use it in other contexts excites people. You suddenly can do more than you were able to do before, and that's the whole thing. Like whenever you started writing all your code in JavaScript, you could start thinking entirely differently about how you're going to create your code. And eventually, we had something else that came and disrupted the whole scene. But this is just a really silly example. It's just an idea for people to see that, this is familiar JavaScript, right? Like, it doesn't get a lot more simple and easy to write for people to do. And so this is, the dawn of the full stack developer. And I mean, it obviously has always been a thing, and it's, who knows if it's what full stack even means anymore, as we'll keep going, because it's, everything is full stack. If you're going to be a developer, you're going to have to be full stack. Little hints for you. But it doesn't really mean anything because we have these tools at this point. I digress again. I apologize. Let's keep going here. So that was just really simple code. Don't flame me. Obviously, this is not a real web server. Come on, guys. It's just to get the idea across that it's just simple JavaScript, and you just send it over the wire, And the first people to really take advantage of this, really, was React, in terms of just having a language where it's a product of functions that, it's just JavaScript, as Tom Ochino would say all the time. And Jordan Walk here, just even in 2013, is JSConf, they're just announcing it. It's like literally like one of the first announcements, and they're talking about this stuff all the time. And so this is really only becoming a reality now. Honestly, we're really getting to the point where we're good at it now. Like, we've been trying this whole time. We've been trying. Even with Backbone, we were trying. But we're just getting to the point where this is becoming a reality for people to be able to do it well. And so let's keep going here. Two completely separate machines. And talk about unidirectional data flow real quick. So the idea was, you had to see here, and they didn't want to worry about that. All they wanted to worry about was the V, and like, it's a little overstated. Obviously, people are using it for their whole framework. You throw in just some state management and you pretty much have everything, and some data, that's everything. But they just wanted to concern themselves with the guy on the bottom. They wanted to know that every single time anything changed up here, they would throw away the view, blow it all away, is with the animation that they had, and start all over again. And that's the whole idea of unidirectional data flow. Boom, blow it up, keep going again. Boom, blow it up, keep going again. How do you do that? It's the virtual DOM. I get into it probably more than I should have in the article. If you want to read about that, the concept's actually pretty simple when you get into it. It gets overblown. Don't get me wrong, their reconciliation algorithm is incredible. I'm not going to get into that. And so we're just going to keep moving here. Virtual DOM and components, we're just going to talk about it quickly. Just the idea is you just turn these into objects, and then you know how to deal with them, and you know when a state changes, and then you use that to trigger everything to go again, all the way from the top, where it starts the render process. And then anywhere along this process, whenever something says, hey, that's different, boom, start back over. And it accumulates, though, along the way. It triggers it, but it's going to accumulate the extra data. And, ooh, buddy, ready for somebody to tell me how wrong I am about that, but it's okay. It's okay. I'm ready. Let me know. But let's move into how this goes back to client-side routing. That's what we're talking about, remember? But the thing is, this really did change the game. It really changed the game. So these guys, they came from Ember. Ryan Florence was giving a talk about a bunch of different languages, and he was asked to talk about React as well, because it was the hotness, the new hotness. And he was like, okay, let me try it out. And he fell in love. He realized he really, really liked it. He wanted to do everything with it, but he realized that he couldn't convince his team. He had apparently just switched them over to Ember, and he was like, I can't convince them to switch again. Let me make sure I can, unless I have a routing solution, because all they're giving me is this V. And so he went and he played with it to see if he could do it. He had the idea, let me do the same kind of router, and he pretty much built the same kind of router. Not as many features originally, but he got there pretty quick. The earliest I could find was 0.7, but it had a good amount of features. But yeah, you can see here Michael Jackson saying, we had no idea what we were doing with React when we started with the router, but we made it and it worked. I was never able to pick up something as quickly as I did with React. And I'm not going to read Ryan's quote here, but I mean, it really says it all. 2 hours, what I just said. And so they built this, and then before they knew it, everybody was using it. And then they had to start maintaining it, and it became their life. But this is it. I mean, it's pretty familiar to what we have now, except look at this. They're just throwing it into a body. Like, okay. And this is our central route config. And this is the earliest one I could find. But you know, they got the dynamic routes. They got the 404 redirects and everything. So they were doing pretty good. But as you can see, centrally, it's just a big component of components. And that's the general idea. But the thing is, originally the top component wasn't a UI component. I'm not going to go through the entire history of React Router like I tried to do in the article. Basic idea is v4, they moved to actual functions for everything, and they did into a really declarative, like full-on, like these are the components of UI that you push inside of each other. So when the nested layout's starting to become more of a thing, nested layouts led to more of a data component, the data fetching and waterfalls, because everything was hidden behind components inside of components. And so at that point, we have a couple years of issues with that, loaders on loaders and nested routes. And so as you can see, the URL is what's changing here, and the view, the UI, is dependent upon that portion of the URL. And so that's how you're tying your state to the URL, and you're tying your view to the URL. And it's very simple, but I mean, it's what you expect to see when you pull that up. But you have the data for each portion nested inside of the other portions. And over here, I think, yeah, this is my little tutorial that I'm going to show off. This is if anybody cares about this eventually. But as you can see, it's the same general principle. You have a specific product within that URL, and that's what you expect to see. And you fetch the data based upon what that URL is. And so nested within the other URL. And so loading spinner, hell. This is because each of the components are nested within each other. They have to wait for the other components that they're nested within to finish loading before they can load any data that's within them. So if you have several dynamic components within each other, it quickly becomes an issue, because if you like you're filtering through different items in different areas, and then one's dependent on the other, then you don't know what to load in the bottom nest until you get to that portion. So React, they help themselves and hurt themselves here, because they were having issues being tied to they had issues recreating React's API, and so they just tried to move into these functions to make it work better for that. But then they realized that by tying all the data loadings to that, it caused them additional issues. And so this is part of what ends up leading to Remix and stuff. But first, we're going to just show what they have for the data loading example on their Remix website. And as you can see, the fetch is based on the route, and that's how the basic data loading works. You see, and that is based on the URL. You tie these things together, and that's how it's nested, and you can do the data loading together instead of separately that way. And then, so you design your server the right way to tie it in with the client. And so this is what we're moving towards. In this modern age, it makes a lot of sense to tie your data loading to the URL, to where you are on the website. It's always kind of made sense, because based on where you are is what you want. It's like you look up your cool link as Tim Berners-Lee, your cool URI, and you find your cool information. You expect it to be exactly the same. And the best way to get that to the user quickly is by tying the view on the client to the server as well as you possibly can. And the best way to do that, as we've found, has been through these meta frameworks mostly. We also have most of the React routers are offering data loading solutions at this point. Really, I'm thinking that React Router has 9 million downloads a week. There's a reason I'm talking about it, because it's the routing solution for client-side people most of the time at this point. But I'm not trying to talk crap about any other option. I'm just talking about what people are using, because I love things like Solid.js. Solid Start has some really exciting ideas, but what people are, don't get me wrong, people are using Solid more and more, and they need to. But the thing is, the only other real option that I've found that's really good is TanStack Router. Really, really fantastic. Really, really exciting ideas going on there. I really, really recommend it. It's still in beta, but the Tanner Lindsley can do no wrong in my eyes. Incredible library. But let's keep moving. And so here we have the meta frameworks. This is, like I said, I'm not trying to leave anyone out. I hear SvelteKit is incredible. I just haven't really learned how to use Svelte. Everybody raves about it though. My website's built in Astro that you're on right now, or I mean, the link is underneath here if you want to take a look at it. I'm in love with their DX. Really, really fun mixing together Solid.js and React and everything else. Svelte if you want to. Nuxt apparently is really, really incredible for the Vue crowd. I build a lot of websites in Next. I am a fan. I've been playing around with Remix. I mean, I would not doubt the React Router guys, and they've hired a lot of talent, and Shopify is behind them now. I think that there's a bright future ahead for Remix, and so there's a lot of really incredible options, because what we've realized, I mean, really these are just frameworks. I mean, really these are just frameworks. Like, you know, like React with the V and MVC, you know, they're a little bit more than a library, but like it's still like it's the meta tag seems like a little silly and meta, honestly. But what they really help you do, it's not just the server rendering, it's also the really exciting page routing that with easy dynamic parameters. It's all kinds of stuff like the data loading solutions, the code splitting is done for you. There's a reason that most people use these days, because things like hydration and server rendering are hard to do yourself. And, you know, like this stuff is still really cutting edge, but it's hard to see how it isn't the future. And so, you know, you might think, okay, Jesse, why are you talking about client-side routing if it's going to be the future on the server? Because it's not on the server, it's in between. Hey guys, one last jump cut. I just wanted to edit in this one last slide because I hope it's transition to the end. It's a transitional slide, you could say. And Rich Harris gave this really wonderful talk about have single-page apps ruin the web. He was promoting his own meta framework, SvelteKit, but I feel like he brought up a lot of really, really great ideas here, and I really recommend that you all watch it. I'm going to link it in the YouTube video, but let me just read this quote out loud. We talk about documents versus apps as though there is this dichotomy, but it's not. It's a spectrum. When we erase the stuff in the middle, we do the web a great disservice. It's a medium that by its very nature resists definitional boundaries. Seriously, go watch the talk. It's great. And I really like this Ryan Carniato quote. Creator of Solid.js, really great YouTube personality. I really recommend checking him out. But he said this great quote. I'm going to go ahead and read it. Routing is the backbone of everything on the web. Honestly, when we blur these lines, a whole lot is possible still without building in a way that pushes everything into the browser. We can scale from simple full-page reloaded multi-page applications to the most sophisticated apps. Maybe these are the hashtag transitional apps that Rich Harris predicted, the creator of Svelte. But as far as I'm concerned, there's only one way to find out. Let's get building. Great quote. And yeah, so I hope anybody's still with me. This ended up longer than I wanted it to be. But I hope that somebody has learned something today. I've learned so much over the course of this, and I really do think that the future is bright. Between everybody, like, competition is a good thing, and I get a little annoyed at these Twitter snipe battles that some people like to have, but because in the end we're all progressing towards a good thing, and especially when a lot of these people have a lot of money behind them, it's like, why are you still arguing? But in the end, it's going to be in between the server and the client. It's going to be a transitional, it's going to be a progressive web app. All of these words, it's going to be island architecture, it's going to be streaming, it's going to be resumability. All of these things are going to play a part. And I think that it's important and impressive for people to work together as we figure these things out in the future. And I guess that's my rant. So I hope that somebody, like I said, please correct me. I'm sure I got things wrong. Please let me know. I'm certain that there were many, many things that I got wrong. And the important thing is that you let me know and I correct them and we all learn. So I hope you learned something today. Thank you.